I was in my second year of college when this happened and was living on my own off campus. My place was a damp basement, and I could barely afford it. About a month into the first semester, I picked up a part-time job at a bar just outside the downtown core. It was a small place called Timbers, and I hadn't heard of it until I saw the job posting. The pay was decent, and the hours worked with my class schedule. Most nights, it was just locals drinking beer and playing pool. There was no real dancing going on, and the music was not that loud. My shifts were late, but I was usually home by 2 in the morning. The owner was a guy named Rick, and he was laid back about most things. He didn't care if I studied behind the bar when it was slow. He also didn't care if I gave out an extra drink or two, as long as it didn't become a habit. But he was strict about one thing. The doors had to be locked by 1 a.m. with no exceptions. I asked once if it was a licensing thing, and he just said, "Doesn't matter why, just stick to it." I didn't push him on that and just agreed right away. On weekends, it would get a little busier with mostly younger people who were probably students at my school. But even then, everyone was out the door by last call because it wasn't the craziest party place in the area. It was easy money for the most part, and I was pretty good at it. I worked there for about 3 or 4 months before anything out of the ordinary happened. It was a Friday night, sometime in late February. It was cold and rainy, and we didn't get much of a crowd. By 12:45, the place had mostly cleared out, but 2 guys stayed behind sitting at the far end of the bar. They looked like they were in their mid-30s. One wore a flannel jacket, the other had a denim vest over a hoodie. They were drunk and laughing loudly, but hadn't caused any problems until then. I gave them the usual line. "All right, guys, time to wrap it up. I gotta close down." They just kinda waved me off and kept drinking, so I figured I'd let them hang for a bit. I locked the front door and started stacking chairs. They were still at the bar, talking too loudly and finishing their beers. I didn't like it, but it didn't seem worth starting a fight over. I just wanted to finish up and get out of there. It was about 1:20 in the morning when things took a turn. I was in the back sweeping near the supply closet when I heard one of the guys slam something on the counter. I walked out front and saw the guy in the hoodie heading toward the office door in the back. He was yelling something and pounding on the door like he thought someone was inside. I told him that the bar was closed and they had to go. He laughed like I was joking, then turned and leaned against the office door. His friend stayed near the bar, swaying slightly and holding his drink like he was trying to make it last. "Come on, man," the hoodie guy said. Then he tried the doorknob like he was going to just walk in. I stepped toward him and repeated myself. He looked at me for a second, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folding knife. It wasn't huge, but it was enough to change the vibe immediately. He didn't wave it around or charge at me. He just held it low at his side and said, "You're not the only one with keys here." That didn't make any sense, but I wasn't going to argue. I backed up slowly and said, "All right, I'm calling the cops." I turned and walked straight into the office, then locked the door behind me. I called the cops as soon as I was in there. The dispatcher said someone would be sent right away, and I stayed on the line for a while, but no one came, not fast enough anyway. I listened through the door, and at first I heard more yelling, then a loud crash, like something being knocked off a table. Then it went quiet for a few seconds. I thought maybe they left. Then I finally heard the front door creak open. A few seconds passed, then it closed again. I waited for a while, and at least 5 more minutes went by with no sound. So I slowly opened the office door and looked down the hallway. One of the guys, the one with the denim vest, was slumped on the floor near the bar, and he wasn't moving. His friend was gone. There was blood on the floor. Not a lot, but enough to know something bad had happened. After seeing that, I closed the office door again and stayed inside. I called the cops a second time and said someone had been stabbed. They told me officers were already on the way, but it had been way longer than it should have. When the police finally showed up, they asked me to come out with my hands visible, so I did. They then went over to the man on the floor, and an ambulance came a few minutes later. They took him out on a stretcher, and one of the EMTs said he still had a pulse, but it didn't look good. He died later that night in the hospital. They checked the security footage while I sat in the office with one of the officers. It showed everything. The guy in the hoodie had pulled the knife, yelled at me, then waited around while I locked myself in the office. His friend didn't do anything, just wandered around near the bar. Then, without warning, the hoodie guy walked up behind him and stabbed him in the back, just once, and that was it. He stood over him for a few seconds, then walked out the front door. They caught him a few hours later. He had blood on his pants and still had the knife. From what I heard, he didn't give them a reason for what he did. Like I said before, they were both really drunk, so who knows what he was thinking. I later found out that the guy wasn't local. Neither of them were. I think they were just passing through, maybe stopping to kill time. I never saw either of them before that night. Rick closed the bar for a week after that, and when it reopened, I only worked a few more shifts before I quit. The money wasn't worth it. This is a little embarrassing to talk about, but about a year ago, I had a pretty bad argument with my wife. It wasn't the first time, but this time it got worse than usual, and I didn't feel like sitting around the house waiting for it to blow over. At around 10 p.m., I grabbed my coat and left without saying where I was going. I got into my car and started driving, then eventually merged onto the highway. It was already dark out and raining by the time I pulled off and parked outside a small building that looked like it might have been a bar. There was no sign, no name, no lights in the windows, just a single neon sign flickering near the door. As soon as I walked in, I could tell that it was a bar. There was dim lighting, no music, and no TVs. Just a long bar, empty stools, and a heavy-set man wiping down the counter. He didn't smile or say hi. He just looked at me once, then went back to cleaning. I took a seat near the middle and asked for a whiskey. He poured it without saying a word and set it down in front of me. There were no menus, no taps, and no prices listed anywhere. I tried to make conversation with the guy a couple times, but he didn't give me much. I didn't see anyone else come in the whole time I was there. I know I should have found it weird, but I was too far gone to care. Eventually, I checked the time, and it was past midnight. I mumbled something about needing to go and reached for my wallet. The bartender stayed quiet for a second, then said,
"We don't take cash here."
I looked up at him.
"No cash. You've been running up a tab. That has to be paid in time."
I gave a dumb laugh because I thought he was joking. Time? What? Like I come back and work it off? He just stared at me.
"Each drink is an hour. You've had 3.
I stood up, wobbling a little. "Yeah, I'm not doing that," I said, heading for the door. But when I got there, it didn't open. I pulled harder, but it was locked.
"I'd sit down,"
he said from behind me.
"You're not ready to leave yet."
I turned to say something, but the room started spinning. My stomach flipped, and I staggered to the wall. Everything looked too bright and too dark at the same time. I remember sliding down to the floor and trying to say something, but my tongue wouldn't move right. The last thing I saw was the bartender standing over me, arms crossed, not saying a word. I'd had a few drinks, but I knew there must have been something else in those pores. Then it all went black. I woke up freezing with my wrists and ankles strapped to a metal chair. The room was small and made of bare concrete. There were no windows, and a single light bulb hung from the ceiling. I couldn't tell how long I'd been out. My head was pounding and my mouth was dry. At first I thought maybe I'd been arrested or taken to detox, but once I woke up a little more, I knew that wasn't it. The bartender came in a few minutes later, holding a clipboard. He didn't look surprised to see me awake.
"You owe 3 hours,
he said flatly. I asked him what the hell was going on. He ignored the question and left the room. I yelled after him, but my voice cracked and didn't carry far. I struggled against the straps, but they didn't budge. After a while, I heard muffled voices through the wall. At some point, someone came in and injected something into my arm. I tried to ask what it was, but they didn't answer. Then I felt tired almost immediately. The next time I woke up, I was being carried, and later, I felt the motion of a vehicle. The straps were still on, and I was lying on a hard surface, which ended up being the back of a van. I could hear road noise and 2 men talking up front. I stayed quiet, trying to figure out if this was some kind of trafficking operation, or a prank had gone too far. Either way, I knew I needed to get out. I tested my hands again, and this time one of the straps felt a little loose. I twisted my wrist slowly until I got it free. A little later, the van pulled into a gas station, and I waited until the engine turned off. Then I made my move. I opened the back doors and shoved them open before they could react. I fell out onto the pavement and scrambled to my feet. Then I ran toward the field next to the gas station, waving and yelling like a maniac. It was light out by then, so I knew that it was already the next day. A guy pumping gas saw me and froze. I begged him to call the police, and he did. The cops arrived about 15 minutes later. I was still shaking and covered in dirt, but I told them everything. They listened, but they looked skeptical, especially since the van was gone by then. They brought me back to the bar. It was open again with lights on and music playing. This time, there were a few customers inside. The same bartender was behind the counter, acting like nothing had happened. The police pulled him aside, and he told them I'd come in drunk, and I passed out. He told them that he was trying to give me a ride home. He said I panicked and ran when he stopped for gas. He even had security footage of me stumbling into the place alone and getting progressively more intoxicated. When I asked about the back room, he showed them a broom closet. There was nothing else behind the bar except storage and a bathroom. They said they couldn't charge him with anything, and I told them to forget it because I knew nobody would take me seriously. I know what happened though. I only had 3 drinks that night, and those guys tried to kill me for sure. I'm Ben, and this took place only about a year ago now, and it really shook me up when it happened. I'm 32 years old, and I've been working in bars and restaurants since I was in high school. In my late 20s, I finally had enough saved to open my own place. Some would call it a dive bar, but I like to think it was a little better than that. It was small though, and because of that, I was able to keep up with the rent right from the start, and even made decent money sometimes. I was wiping down the bar after a slow night when my phone rang. I almost let it go to voicemail, but I answered at the last second. It was my friend Kenny, who I had recently reconnected with. We'd grown up together, played basketball at the same park, and went to the same high school. He was always a lot of fun, but he was also getting into trouble a lot. In high school, he started stealing bikes, and by his 20s, it was cars. Eventually, he was caught in Calgary running something across the border. It had been a few years since that, and he was getting his life back together. We were hanging out a few times a week, and he was getting married later in the year, so things were looking up for him. "What's going on?" I asked. "I need a favor," he said. "Just for a couple days. I've got something I need to store in your walk-in freezer. It's nothing dangerous, I swear. I just need it kept cold and safe." I told him I didn't want anything illegal in the bar, because I had enough to deal with running the place. But he kept going and said it was nothing that'd get me in trouble, just for holding it. He said I was the only one he could ask, and he sounded like he hadn't slept in a while. I told him fine, but just for a couple days. He showed up that night around midnight, driving some dented old car. He looked skinny, pale, and nervous, which was actually normal for him. He popped the trunk and pulled out a heavy green duffel bag, and I asked what was in it. "Stuff I need to hang on to," he said. "That's all." I unlocked the back door and walked him through the kitchen. He stuck the bag in the far back corner of the freezer, then he left. The next day I opened up like normal. My bartender Joe worked the day shift, and I took over at around 5. It was mostly regulars that night, and it was a quiet crowd. I didn't tell Joe or anyone else about the bag, and I didn't even need to go near the freezer. 2 nights later, I came in and found the back door cracked open, and the freezer door had fresh dents in it. There were scratches near the handle, like someone had tried prying it open. Nothing else in the bar was touched. The till was locked, and the bottles were in place, but the freezer door had clearly taken a beating. Whoever it was, they weren't looking for booze. I opened the freezer and checked the bag. It was still there, zipped shut and right where he'd left it. I stood there for a minute, then finally unzipped it and looked inside, something I should have done from the start. It was full of cash, and underneath there were 3 handguns wrapped in a hoodie. I zipped it back up and just stood there again, not sure what to do. I sat in the office for a while after that, trying to think. I tried calling Kenny, but he didn't pick up. I waited and tried again later, still nothing. I sent a couple of texts, but he didn't respond to those either. That night, just before closing, 2 guys came in. I'd never seen them before. One had a shaved head and wore a dark hoodie. The other had a baseball cap pulled low over his face. They walked in, looked around, and sat at the bar, but didn't order anything. I asked if they wanted a drink, but one of them said no. They sat there for a while without speaking. My bartender Joe gave me a look like he could tell something was off too. After 10 minutes or so, they stood up and left without saying anything else. After that, I told Joe he could go home, and that I would close up myself. Once he left, I locked the doors and sat in the office again. I didn't want to deal with the police, but I also wasn't going to get shot over whatever Kenny dumped in my freezer. I found the number for the police department's tip line and wrote it down. I kept it on the desk the rest of the night, but didn't call it until the next morning. When I did, I just gave them the address and said someone had left something at my business that might be illegal. I told them I didn't want to be involved and hung up. I figured they'd show up later that day and take it off my hands. I didn't even want to be there when they came. But that night, before they had a chance to show up, the two guys came back. I was locking up and heading out the back door when I saw the two of them waiting in the alley. It was the same guys who had come in the other night. They stepped out from behind a dumpster and walked straight over to me. The guy in the hoodie walked up to me and asked for the bag. He didn't raise his voice or make any threats, but I knew they were serious and I wasn't about to try anything. I didn't see a gun or weapon of any kind, but I would be surprised if they weren't armed. I told them the bag was still in the freezer, and I said they could have it. They took the bag, then I stayed inside and waited a while longer. About 10 minutes later, two cops showed up. I let them in and showed them the freezer, but by then, there wasn't much to see. I didn't want to rat out my friend, but he betrayed me first, so I figured it was fine. I gave them his number and said what he did, then they left without much else. I was still kind of worried that I was going to get in trouble for what I did, but that never happened. After the cops got involved, I never contacted Kenny again. I got a call from him a few days later, but I ignored it. I didn't want to deal with his crap anymore.